Before I started eating plant-based, meatballs were a staple in my diet, and they were a very comforting meal for me, so today we're going to be recreating them. They're of course going to be plant-based, but we'll also be using mostly whole food and nutrient-dense ingredients. I've got some great tips throughout the video on how to make these meatballs juicy and full of flavour, starting with how we cook the lentils. We're going to be cooking the lentils in a mushroom stock, and this is going to add a lovely deep rich flavour to them. If you can't find any mushroom stock cubes or powder, then you can use a vegetable stock and add a little soy sauce for that umami flavour. Add your mushroom stock to a saucepan, we'll then dissolve it in hot water and add the lentils, which I've just quickly rinsed under cold water. You don't want these meatballs to be too mushy, so we're going to undercook the lentils. Simply bring them to a simmer and then we're going to cook them for 15 minutes. To save energy while cooking the lentils, I'm just going to put a lid on, and this is going to allow us to keep the heat nice and low, but still keep it simmering. After 15 minutes, they'll be soft on the outside and have a slight bite in the middle. They will have absorbed the mushroom stock, giving them a lovely meaty, rich flavour. Sieve them, but don't rinse them, as we don't want to wash off any of that mushroomy flavour. We'll then pour them onto a baking tray and leave them to steam dry. As well as cooking fresh mushrooms for these meatballs, I'm also going to be using some dried porcini mushrooms, which have a really strong mushroomy flavour. It is optional, but definitely recommended. I've got a lovely selection of mushrooms that I got from the supermarket, including a selection of oyster and shiitake mushrooms. I find these specialty mushrooms have a more chewy and juicy texture, which is perfect for the meatballs, but they are a little bit more expensive than your standard mushrooms like chestnut or portobello. I'm also finding that supermarkets are getting way better at stocking the more specialty mushrooms, whereas before you had to go to like a special organic store. Now you can get them pretty common in just regular supermarkets. Let me know if it's the same where you live, if you find it hard to find these more uncommon mushrooms, such as like shiitake or king oyster mushrooms. Before you start chopping, always lay down some wet kitchen towel or a tea towel to keep your chopping board nice and secure. We're going to be chopping the mushrooms with a knife, but you're welcome to use a food processor if you're in a rush. I like to chop the mushrooms fairly roughly, as this gives you different sized pieces, and then you'll get chewy bits and juicy bits, and that gives you a really nice texture for the meatballs. These meatballs are great to batch cook, and then you can freeze them either before you cook them or after you cook them, and then just defrost them as you need them. Once they look like this, you can put them aside, and we're going to do a little bit more chopping. As always, keep your chopping board nice and clean in between each vegetable that you prepare. Sun-dried tomatoes add the perfect chewy and juicy texture to the meatballs, and we're just going to chop them up similar to the size of the mushrooms. I find they can be quite slippery when chopping them, so just be careful not to cut yourself. As well as the amazing texture they also have a beautiful sweet, almost tangy flavour, which is going to go beautifully in these meatballs. Next, we're just going to finely dice one white onion. Start by topping and tailing the onion, we're then going to cut it in half, and this is going to make it really easy to get the peel off. Make sure to keep the root on the onion, as this is going to keep it together. We'll then turn it around and make thin vertical slices down the onion, just making sure not to go all the way through the root. Then make 2 or 3 horizontal cuts across the onion, just making sure not to go all the way through once again. Then you can simply chop through your onion, keeping your fingertips nice and tucked in, and you're going to get perfectly finely diced onion. This is how I was taught to cut onions, and I was also taught that you should only have this much onion left at the end, so no wastage. So that is all the chopping we need to do. I'm just going to peel 2 garlic cloves ready to be zested into the fried mushrooms. Heat up a frying pan over a medium-high heat with a tablespoon of olive oil. We're then going to add in our chopped mushrooms and make sure that they're sizzling. Then add in your finely diced onion. We're going to fry this until most of the water from the mushrooms has been evaporated and they're nice and caramelized. As always, we're going to add a good grating of freshly ground black pepper for that almost spicy, savoury note. Personally, I much prefer to freshly grind the pepper, as the pre-ground stuff tends to lose its flavour and pepperiness. Once the mushrooms are mostly cooked, we're going to zest in 2 garlic cloves and cook them for a couple of minutes. Season the mix with some flaky sea salt. I'm then going to deglaze the pan with some red wine. If you're not a drinker like myself, then you can buy these little 250ml bottles, which are great for using in bologneses or stews. We're going to completely reduce the wine until it's almost like a jammy texture and all the alcohol has been cooked out. If you still prefer not to use wine, then you can use a tablespoon of red wine vinegar. I'm then going to add some Worcestershire sauce, Worcestershire, I'm not really sure how to say it, but it adds a lovely tangy sweet taste. Don't worry if you can't find it though. Stir this through, the mushrooms will be lovely sticky, jammy and caramelized, and they should look something like this. Get them into a large bowl and we'll put them to the side to cool down. We do have one more thing to chop, and that is the dried porcini mushrooms that we've rehydrated, and we're just going to finely chop them as they do have quite a strong flavour. Into a food processor, we're going to add some walnuts and also some pre-cooked chestnuts. Pulse these a few times, we don't want to grind them into a complete powder, we still want a little bit of texture, almost like a rough sand. You can use any nuts that you like, and if you can't find any chestnuts, just replace the quantity with more nuts. Once they look like this, you can put them in the bowl with the cooked mushrooms. Next, into the food processor, we're going to add the lentils that we've cooked and dried. Don't worry if there is a little bit of moisture on them, we don't want the meatballs to be too dry. Blend these until mostly smooth. You'll probably need to scrape them down a couple of times throughout the process. Once they look like this, mostly smooth but with a few chunks, you can add them into the bowl. We're now finished using the food processor and we're going to add all the other ingredients into the bowl, starting with the dried porcini mushrooms, then the sun-dried tomatoes. Next, we've got some ground flaxseed, and this is going to help soak up any excess moisture and keep the meatball from falling apart. It's also got lots of good nutrients. Next, I've been a bit lazy and I've got an Italian herb seasoning which has thyme, oregano, rosemary, marjoram and lots of other good stuff in it. Follow that with some nutritional yeast for that nutty, cheesy flavour. Then I'm going to grind in some nutmeg, which has a lovely aromatic, earthy and comforting flavour. If you can't find nutmeg, then just add some extra black pepper. Next, as I am British, we've got to add some marmite for even more salty, umami flavour. If you can't get marmite, then you can add some dark soy sauce. Out of interest, let me know in the comments if you can find marmite where you live. Then we'll just get in there with a spoon or spatula and keep stirring it until it's all well combined. As a chef, I always like to get my hands involved so that you can get all the ingredients perfectly distributed throughout the meatball. You can see now that it's starting to come together and stick together, meaning it's going to form perfect meatballs, or vegetables I guess. You could also use this to make bolognese or for burgers. I'm going to pop it in the fridge for around 20 minutes just to firm it up a little bit more. A quick tip when rolling out the meatballs is to have a little bowl of water to dip your fingers into, and this is going to stop the meatballs from sticking to your fingers. Roll out all your meatballs, making sure they're nice and compact. I'm going to be serving these meatballs with the classic spaghetti and tomato sauce, so I'm going to show you a really quick and delicious tomato sauce recipe before we go and fry the meatballs. In a pan or saucepan, heat up a tablespoon or two of olive oil, and we're going to pop a bay leaf in, followed by a zested clove of garlic. Stir this around and let it sizzle for about 1 minute just to start cooking the garlic. Don't let it go brown though. We'll then add a can of chopped tomatoes. I'm also going to add a drizzle of balsamic vinegar for that tangy sweet flavour. Stir that in and then follow it up with a good grinding of freshly ground black pepper. Then, as I'm not going to be cooking this sauce down for hours on end, I'm going to get in there with a potato masher and just lightly crush the tomatoes. You could also blend it at the end, but personally I like there to be a little bit of texture. Let it simmer for about 8 to 10 minutes, we'll then add in some fresh basil, a touch of salt, and that is your quick but delicious tomato sauce. To cook the meatballs, I'm going to heat up a tablespoon of olive oil over a medium heat. I'll then add them in one by one. I like to do this so that I know which one I need to turn first. I'll include cooking instructions for the oven and air fryer in the recipe, and that will be in the description box of the video. So we'll just fry the meatballs for about 2 minutes on each side until they're beautiful and golden brown, for a total of around 8 to 10 minutes. If you're looking to win over any family members or friends who are yet to go plant-based, then this is the recipe to cook for them, as they've got a lovely chewy, juicy texture, an amazing meaty flavour, and they're absolutely delicious. Before we taste the meatballs, let's have a quick look inside to check the texture. Right, let's give these a try. Round 2. They are incredible. The texture is just lovely. They've got a nice chew from the sun-dried tomatoes and the mushrooms, and then they've got a little bit of nuttiness from the walnuts and the chestnuts, of course, and then they're still really nice and juicy. Just the perfect plant-based meatball, in my opinion. If you've got some plant-based skeptics in your friend group or your family, then serve them these and they will absolutely love them, I promise you that. I think cooking the lentils in that mushroom stock makes such a difference. You can taste the seasoning, the umami flavour throughout, and then they just go perfectly with that really tangy tomato sauce. Looking for more plant-based inspiration, then check out this video and subscribe to the Earthy Goodness Kitchen.